Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. October 21st? I think it is 21st. Anyway, there are two interesting articles, a lot of headlines being made tonight about Donald Trump and the transgender community as a whole. And so I just wanted to kind of do some research into it because this has always been a topic that's not necessarily on my mind, but on my mind. We live in a society, and a society that has evolved, not evolution in the fact that, transgender people came out of nowhere. The term certainly was not really used until the mid 1980s, according to my Google search results. But obviously, there have been people in the past and history that may have, if you were to ask them today, identified as being transgender. Again, a transgender person is someone who identifies or does not identify with the sex in which they were assigned at birth. So, it all comes down to genetics. If you have two X chromosomes, you are technically a female. And if you have an X and a Y chromosome, you are technically a male. And if you're wondering about all this jibber jabber writing that looks like blood on a wall, I was just watching a YouTube video real quick that kind of explained what it means to have the Y chromosome. And it's interesting. All it takes is like 5 to 10 minutes on YouTube to really educate yourself on things such as this. And that's what I did because I wanted to make sure that I was slightly educated when I talked about this. Now, I do want to say that these are my views. These might not be views that you necessarily share or agree with, but I truly do believe that if you have two X chromosomes, you are a female. That's not to say that you don't identify as a male or as something else, or if you have an XY chromosome that you might not identify as a male. You might identify more as a female, and it's actually scientifically proven that you could have an XY chromosome and still be a female, or you could still identify as having a female. And all you have to do is go to a YouTube video. I'm going to show you this awesome channel you can check out. It's this video is called the SARY gene, the SRY gene. SRY stands for like something region in the Y chromosome that basically determines the gender. It determines the gender, the Y chromosome does, but then there are genes here like the sertoli, and there's another one that create these anti-mullinian, whatever they're called, hormones. I just learned this stuff. And that hormone might not actually always work 100% of the time, but its job is to not allow the male body to produce all the female like body parts and things like that. And then there's another gene that's supposed to produce the testes and the testosterone that might also not work. There are so many things in our human body that might not work right. I mean, you see people, we have all these different diseases, we have all these different, and I'm not saying that transgender is a disease. I'm just saying that there are things out there in our bodies that we still are learning to understand. There are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of different base pairs in our chromosomes. Out of our, you get your chromosomes from your mom and your dad, 23 pairs of chromosomes, if I'm getting that number right, so 46 altogether. But there are so many things in that determine what you're going to grow up with. Some that don't even get expressed until later on in life. So who are we to say? And again, I didn't even get to start reading this article yet. I'm just kind of going over the base science. But again, check out this. Testes Development Made Simple. I can't remember who it was published by, but it's like a science guy who made it. I'll probably put a link in it at the bottom. But it's really good and really interesting stuff. So anyway, the New York Times as well as the Mary Sue website, both really just getting into this whole issue. The Trump administration wants to strip transgender people of their rights in latest attacks. I wanted to just read some of it and just get a feel for exactly what is being said. The Trump administration is systemically, and I understand the Mary Sue is probably like very liberal transgender leaning already, and the New York Times probably is as well. So we're going to just try to parse this with as much of a biased view as possible, understanding that these are not two biased sources. But anyway, the Mary Sue goes on and says, the Trump administration is systemically chipping away at rights and protections for the transgender community. Previously, Trump has proposed a ban on trans people in the military, in addition to rolling back Obama-era guidelines to protect trans people and trans students and trans people in the workplace from discrimination, which I think is wrong. I mean, look, if people identify that way, you shouldn't be rolling back protections against them. But let's continue reading. Now the administration is considering a complete overhaul of the legal definitions of sex and gender, aiming to strip the gender identity of the estimated 1.4 million Americans who identify as transgender. 1.4 million Americans out of 300 million Americans doesn't seem like a lot, but obviously it is a significant, substantial number of Americans who identify as transgender. The Department of Health and Human Services is trying to establish a legal definition of sex under Title IX, which would make gender a biological, immutable condition determined by a person's genitalia at birth. And the New York Times broke the story. The department argued in its memo that key government agencies needed to adopt an explicit and uniform definition of gender as determined on a biological basis that is clear, grounded in science, objective, and administrable. The agency's proposed definition would define sex as either male or female, unchangeable, and determined by the genitals that a person is born with, according to a draft reviewed by the Times. Any dispute about one's sex would be clarified during or using genetic testing. So there's a few things in here that just strike me. So first of all, they're not saying, to me, in my mind, they're not saying that you can't be transgender. They're clearly saying that you are either born with 2 X chromosomes or 2 Y chromosomes. And according to this video, you are genotypically a male if you have an XY chromosome, or you are genotypically a female if you have 2 X chromosomes. But you could have some of these things that happen where you might not produce a certain hormone. You might not have Sertoli or whatever the other type of thing was. You might not have some of these things happening here that would lead you to be phenotypically a male. You might be genotypically XY, but you might not have all these things happen in your body to make you phenotypically a male, and vice versa. You might have XX, but you might still, you might be genotypically a female, but you might be genotypically a female, but not phenotypically a female. There's so much science that really goes into this that I really wish people would actually use that in some of these articles and not just, spout off on things. So anyway, it goes on to say, let's take a step back. This is still the Mary Sue. How we define sex and gender. Once thought to be interchangeable terms, now we recognize sex and gender as 2 distinct concepts. GLAAD's media glossary summarizes the differences as such. So it looks like they actually are going to talk about this a little bit. So sex is the classification of a person as male or female. At birth, infants are assigned a sex, usually based on the appearance of their external anatomy. This is what is written on the birth certificate. A person's sex, however, is actually a combination of bodily characteristics, including chromosomes, hormones, internal and external reproductive organs, and secondary characteristics. And I don't agree with GLAAD's media glossary. Sex is simply defined by if you have 2 X chromosomes or an XY chromosome. If you have 2 X's, you are of the female sex. If you have an XY chromosome, you are of the male sex. I don't agree with taking chromosomes into account along with hormones, internal and external reproductive organs, and secondary sex characteristics. You have 1 pair of chromosomes, the 23rd pair, the XY pair, the X, whatever you want to call it. They determine sex in my mind. And then they go on to gender identity, a person's internal, deeply held sense of their gender. For transgender people, their own internal gender identity does not match the sex they were assigned at birth. Most people have a gender identity of man or woman or boy or girl. For some people, their gender identity does not fit neatly into one of these 2 choices. See non-binary and or genderqueer below. Unlike gender expression, gender identity is not visible to others. And while it might not be visible, I don't fully agree with GLAAD's definition, and I don't have to. I support people and their beliefs, and I will work, with them. It's not like I'm just completely scrapping everything that they're saying, but I can see it being a deeply held sense of their gender. But I think it's more than that. I think it gets back down to science. Look, if you have a deeply held belief of your gender, it's not just a belief. It's probably because you have hormones that are being expressed in your body to cause that belief, to cause you to feel a certain way towards certain people, to cause you to feel maybe more feminine or more masculine than the people in your culture. Again, we are not just the people that are just, nature. We are also nurtured. We are a society that is nature and nurture. So many things that have been set up, many structures that have been set up have defined masculinity a certain way and have defined femininity a certain way. So while you might have the XY chromosome that determines that you are a male, they might not be expressing themselves through the hormones, through all the different things that are supposed to happen in your body. And so you might not fit the category of male in your culture. You might actually fit it in another culture. You might be more male in another culture. It's nurture, nature, it all works together. But just to say that you have the expression, I really do wish that GLAAD would actually update this to say a person's internal, deeply held sense of their gender in conjunction with, or maybe not in conjunction with, the way their hormones are being expressed. That's where they should add some of the hormones and internal, external reproductive organs and secondary sex characteristics. They should put that under gender identity as well, and I'm surprised that they don't. So, what's happened recently? So this article goes on to say the Obama administration has adopted a more open concept of gender not limited to a person's biological sex, which allows Title IX protections for trans students and federally funded schools. Now, the Health and Human Services memo is doing nothing less than legally negating the existence of the transgender identity. And to me, that just seems like the Obama administration went really far, and that's typically what... I don't like getting political, but Democrats will do what Democrats need to do to get people on their side. They do. I'm sorry, they do. So anyway, if the memo is adopted, it will have far-reaching ramifications for the trans community across all the major departments of the government. And I would like to know what some of those are, if you would like to speak on this. Again, I'm not knocking this. I'm trying to educate as well as be educated. So I would love to hear back in a nice formal discussion. But anyway, HRC President Chad Griffin issued a statement in response to the memo saying, setting a destructive precedent, the Trump-Pence administration intends to erase LGBTQ people from federal civil rights protections and eviscerate enforcement of non-discrimination laws. Defining sex in this narrow language tailored to the talking points of anti-equality extremists is part of a deliberate strategy to eliminate federal protections of the LGBTQ people. This is a direct attack on the fundamental equality of the LGBTQ people, and if this administration refuses to reverse course, Congress must immediately take action by advancing the Equality Act to ensure that LGBTQ people are explicitly protected by our nation's civil rights laws. And again, I support this completely. Directive, it finishes by saying this directive is nothing more than a callous and calculated attempt to dehumanize trans people and negate their existence. Now might be a good time to triple check that voter registration and get these monsters out of government. And it's hard for me to say that this is a calculated attempt to dehumanize trans people. I don't want to say that it is. Obviously, again, reading from the Mary Sue, reading from the New York Times, they are, of course, going to say that. I would tend to agree because I really don't like most of what Trump does. But again, I just don't see this as being a blatant, straight-out attack on trans people. I feel like, again, the previous administration, in my mind, may have went a little bit too far because, again, they try to get the buy-in of as many people as they can to solidify the votes that they can get. And so just like in the 50s and 60s when the Democrats realized that they needed to switch from just getting the white Southern vote to getting the Northern black vote from the Republican Party, they started to do more to support blacks and smaller communities. And not just to do more to support them, but not necessarily support them, but just create systems by which they would feel like Democrats were helping them out. So I feel like this is the same thing that's happening here. The Democrats, when Obama was in office, they made sure to add more protections for trans people, to put them into language and things like that, and it's created more of chaos and catastrophe for the government than is necessary. We can argue about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. So anyway, I'm not going to read the New York Times article because it just goes on and on and on like a New York Times article typically does. I think the Mary Sue gave a pretty good summary of exactly what was being talked about, but I would love to hear what everyone else thinks about this. Do you really think that the Trump administration is just really trying to attack the trans community and destroy them? Again, I don't think anything's going to destroy the trans community. Nothing can destroy science. Like it's science, basically. If I'm not going to go over it again, but you can have an XY chromosome and still identify as female, and it is scientifically proven. Again, you can just go to this video. Gosh, I wish I had the guy's name, but I don't have it. But it's basically this science website, and he explains a lot of things really simple using like just a pen and paper basically. But again, he explains it really simple how gene expression might not happen in certain cases. It's genetics. It's all in genetics. And so if we had more scientists working in the White House, they would probably be able to come up with the right language to support something that the government could work with and not feel so confused, because right now we have Trump and his baboons, and they don't understand how genetics works, and that someone could have an XY chromosome and be a male but still relate to females. And not a lot of people do realize that. A lot of conservatives, a lot of Christians don't realize that. They think if you have the XY chromosome and you look like a man, you better act like a man and talk like a man and walk like a man. And that's just not the case. It's not the case. And again, science backs it all up. And if you don't believe science, then you are just a complete fool and don't at me at all. So anyway, let me know what you think about this, about Trump, about the transgender community, and I will see you all tomorrow. Peace out and stay strong, my brothers and sisters all over the place, of all creeds, colors, races, orientations, sexes, whatever. Stay strong, stay positive, and I will see you all tomorrow. Peace out.